Today's picture booking episode features host Nick Patton and the award-winning author and illustrator team of Elizabeth Partridge and Lauren Tamaki. Here's a taste of where today's conversation goes.
Then we got to the part about this just tremendous protest and the emotional power of what happened. And she's like, this is a picture book. Can a picture book handle this? And I'm like, oh, we cannot leave this out, because this is the piece that is always, always left out. I'm Elizabeth Partridge. I'm an author living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I grew up in a big extended family of photographers. So I love putting photographs into the books that I write.
I'm Lauren Tamaki, and I'm an illustrator and designer. I'm a Canadian, currently living in New York, and I'm a fourth generation Japanese Canadian with Egyptian and Ukrainian mixed in there too. Seen and Unseen is my first big picture book, and I was so happy that it was with Elizabeth.
Before we share today's interview, we have some sad news. Nick's family is going through a challenging time due to the passing of his mother-in-law, Patty Netzer, last Friday. Let's keep Nick, Melissa, and their children in our thoughts as they grieve. Thank you. As far as this podcast goes, Nick cannot update the website or promote the upcoming shows until later in the year. We apologize to Elizabeth, Lauren, and last week's guest, Becky Scharnhorst, for not giving their episodes the whole picture booking promotional experience. And now, here is a heartfelt conversation about Seen and Unseen, what Dorothea Lange, Toyo Miyatake, and Ansel Adams's photographs reveal about the Japanese-American incarceration.
Can you guys just introduce us to this book, Seen and Unseen?
So Seen and Unseen, well, first of all, I would say it's a project of the heart for me and for Lauren and for our editor. The subject matter is the Japanese-American incarceration during World War II. And it's told through the viewpoint primarily of three different photographers, Dorothea Lange, Toyo Miyatake, and Ansel Adams. And luckily, we have their photographs to tell this story. But there was a lot that they weren't able to photograph or chose not to photograph. And that's where Lauren comes into the picture on this book.
How did this story start for you, Elizabeth? How did this thing all begin, that this is the story you want to tell?
I mentioned that I grew up in this family of photographers, and my godmother was Dorothea Lange, who's well known for her photograph Migrant Mother during the Great Depression, but she also photographed the incarceration of the Japanese Americans during World War II. Because Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor and then we declared war on Japan, we decided as a country, led by our president, that we would incarcerate all the Japanese Americans living on the West Coast because we are afraid they might aid the Japanese. I always knew this story because I had grown up just across the town from Dorothea, and we spent a lot of time in her family for all our family events. And I knew about it, but I didn't know too much about it. I did, however, have a photograph that my father had been given by Dorothea when she was putting together an exhibition of her work at the end of her life. There was a big, beautiful print taken in Manzanar of a grandfather and his grandson walking down one of these main dusty streets between the barracks. This was Terrazzo Sakaway. And my father was given that big print by Dorothea, and he gave it to me. And it's always, sorry, this makes me a little emotional. I've had it on the wall of my office for many, many, many years. And when I walk into my office, I see it, and I've always felt that the grandfather's eyes were saying to me, when will you tell our story? I felt the grandfather's eyes were saying, when will you tell our story? And finally, it was time. It was just time. It was time. So that's how I got started on this. And then I just dove into all the amazing materials that were available to tell a forgotten and obfuscated history.
Yeah, when I experienced this book, I knew, like you said, you knew about this. I've heard about this, but then like I think this book takes the time to like really put you in that story, and you feel that, uh, the emotion and the decision and what seemed like such a quick snap decision, and whoa, and what that meant for everybody. Is just wow. So why tell the story? Why tell the story? So you had that one photographer.
Right.
Why tell the story with three photographers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I, of course, knew Dorothea's photographs. I also knew that her friend, her very dear friend, Ansel Adams, had also photographed at Manzanar because Dorothea did not approve of the job he had done. She felt he really didn't get it about the incarceration. So I thought, oh, that would be so interesting to balance their two different viewpoints together in one book. And then the minute I dove into the material, I found Toyo Miyatake, who was incarcerated, had smuggled in a lens and a film holder, and his friends built him a wooden camera. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have three very different viewpoints to tell this story. And I couldn't resist. I mean, it was just so exciting. So then I had it's fabulous. It's fantastic to me to look at photographs, and we can get into that a little later, like what they show and don't show.
Sure.
But the thing there, I'll tell you, there was one very important thing that was missing. What was missing was the photographs told a lot, but they didn't show what the photographers were literally directed, like Dorothea, do not photograph the barbed wire. Do not photograph the guard towers. Do not photograph the toilets all in a row. So she chafed at that restriction, but that she had to work within that restriction. And then Ansel comes along towards the end of the incarceration and just does these very lovely pictures of how people are doing very well, which is one story, but it's a different story. And then you have the insider point of view right in the middle of Toyo Miyatake's photos. But what was missing was a certain amount of energy and movement and what was outside the lens. And that's where Lauren came in and just blew this whole project out of the water.
Elizabeth, let me just ask this question. Did you think at a time that you didn't need an illustrator, that you had these beautiful photographs, you can tell a story? Or did you always think this needed that piece that you thought was missing? Was that right from the start you felt like, and the publisher felt like that was needed?
Yes, yeah, right from the very beginning. I was like, there's a story that we can't tell just with words and photographs, because the minute you have incarceration, you have restriction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just so eager to have more of the story be told. So I asked the editor, could we have an illustrator on this? And then, just the miracle was getting Lauren as our illustrator, who brought so much more to this project than I had even envisioned.
Our wonderful editor, Ariel Richardson, contacted my agent, Charlotte Sheedy, with this request to do this book. And this was back in 2018. And I know, Elizabeth, you had obviously started this whole process years before. And I was like, wow, they're asking me. I had done one book before that, kind of a smaller job. It's called You Are Mighty, with Caroline Paul, and which was fantastic experience as well. But this was a picture book. This was every single page had to have this kind of full experience. And I was like, fantastic. Charlotte's like, you have to do this book. And anybody who knows Charlotte Sheedy, you don't argue with Charlotte. So, but it was intimidating for the reasons I mentioned before, because I hadn't had too much book experience. I'm mostly an editorial illustrator. And also because of the subject matter, it wasn't something I had learned about in school that much, even though I'm Japanese Canadian, and I knew that my family had had experiences with the incarceration up in Canada, where it happened as well. It wasn't spoken about. It wasn't something that's like, well, here's are the lessons we learned, and here's where we because they had the attitude, and I understand. That was hard, that was terrible, but we have to keep on going. We don't have to dwell on that. That's the past. So I thought, am I even qualified to talk about the Japanese American experience, or Japanese Canadian experience in that way? But I knew it, because you only grow from these challenges. So I really dove into it, and I'm so happy I did.
So when you dove into it, what was it like? What was it? I mean, were you learning stuff about your family? I mean, like you said, no one talked about it. You were just semi-aware. I mean, you were aware, but now you were like knee deep in all this research. What did it feel like to work on a book like this?
Well, it was the research. That was before I even, put a pencil on a piece of paper. It was getting out every book I could from the Brooklyn Public Library, watching every movie I could about it. Of course, I did ask my family. Oh, and my dad, he said, my dad never talked about it. And he had this, this idea, this feeling of like, I can't really impart any knowledge to you on that. So it was, and I actually did learn about my own family through the process of researching, just even from documents and stories, and even this incredible situation where I was just researching, kind of looking into the Canadian incarceration as well, and I came across this photo, and I think I typed in George Tamaki, which was my grandfather's name, and it came up that he actually taught in a camp in British Columbia, and the person who had uploaded this story and these images knew him. She was one of his pupils, and so I contacted her saying, like, is that my grandfather in this picture with you in your class? And she's like, yes. And so I unearthed some of my family history even through the research. But kind of going back to the book, it was just like poring over these images, and I even talk about it in the illustrator's note, and it was really painful, because they looked like my aunt, my uncle, my sister, me. It was these faces of these Japanese Americans, and with Dorothea's images and with some of the other WRA photographers, it captured so much of the experience, from people being on their farms initially, people living in the cities, people going about their lives, and then you see the transition of people packing up their lives, people leaving their farms, and going to Tanforan to be held at the stables, then being moved to Manzanar, and so there was a wealth of imagery for me to draw on, and that really was, I had to do it for several reasons. I had to do it to educate myself. I had to do research and just dig into it. And then I had to do it in order to do a proper job on this book, to honor Elizabeth, to honor these people who had gone through this, and to do the best that I could. It was just research. I think basically for like a year and a half, it was just research.
Well, it shows, because it shows in your illustrations. So talk about how you did this, because this seems like a massive task for. Because what you're doing is you're taking the text and the photography and all these documents, and then you're like the glue. The illustration is like it's bringing all this stuff together, and it's showing the things that, like Elizabeth was saying, it's showing the things that couldn't be photographed. How did you tackle that design illustration problem to bring the story to life?
I think, it was an evolution. It was when Elizabeth had brought the manuscript to, well, I guess technically Ariel brought the manuscript to Charlotte, who brought it to me. It was, Elizabeth, correct me if it was like 65 pages initially.
Yeah, that's
And,
right. Yeah.
And I love the story that you told our editor. Tell the story. That you didn't want to do a long book.
Yeah. When I started in on this project, I was like, okay, look, I definitely, I love this project, but it's getting a little out of hand. So I just want to draw a limit here that this is not going to be more than like a 32 or maybe a little bit longer of a picture book. We'll just squeeze it all in. And she's like, okay. And then, of course, when I got going and I was like, well, we're going to need a little bit more of a page count. So it got bigger and bigger. And then Lauren took it on. And
yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't that it was a questioning what the content or questioning, oh, is this done properly? It just happened so organically, because I would say to her, well, maybe we could add this part about, just the illustration only pages about moving people, say the spread where they're being bused from LA to Tanforan, because there weren't any photographs of that. And it really fit into Elizabeth's thesis to add that connective tissue in there. So and the same thing with the documents, that wasn't, I don't think there were any originally planned, but just between me and Elizabeth talking, it was, oh, well, it wouldn't it be great if we had a tag in there? Wouldn't it be great if we had the actual poster where they say, people of Japanese descent have to, basically, we're going to take you away from your homes, and to have those original documents in there. So it was a mammoth task to begin with, but it wasn't as intimidating as it seems now, because it kind of grew and grew and grew and like gathered all of that information and became bigger and bigger and bigger. And Elizabeth had a lot of the photos in place already that she wanted to use, and she had a couple ideas of where she wanted to use them. One of the ones that stayed really intact from her original vision was an Ansel photo where he had taken a nice photo of a family standing in front of what looks like a little bungalow, looks like a very cute family house, and then cut out the rest that it is a tar paper barrack that a bunch of other families lived in. And she had that idea to elaborate onto that photo, and that idea stayed intact to the final book. So it was, to answer your question in a very, very, very long way, there was the foundation there, and then it was a lot of evolution and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah. So all that research and all the stuff you guys did, this is a question for both of you. What was the most surprising or unexpected thing you learned from this research and the writing and the illustrating of this book?
Yeah, I think what surprised me the most was there was a big, we don't, even if you know about Manzanar, you don't realize that there was a protest one night where everybody was finally fed up with what was going on. And there was just a big nighttime protest. And of course, there are no photographs of it. It was at night. And also, Toyo was like, whoa, if I get caught with my camera out there, like trying to photograph under some little bit of available light, I will really be in trouble. So there's absolutely zero photographs of it. But luckily, Lauren was able to take and do this incredible, I think it's a 4-page spread of the whole thing. And there's sort of an incredible beauty to having no photographs, because all of a sudden you're in a completely other medium that has no breaks beyond this just intense emotional line of the work that she did to illustrate it. And oh my gosh, to have this was, the military police were called in and several people were shot and died. And I think hearing about this whole thing, I was like, and this came up for me early on in the process when I was still putting this book together with Ariel, and I was showing her, I had arranged all my spreads on a wall. So I had text and a place for a photograph on probably by then we're up to like 48 pages, and I had them all stuck on a wall, and I had Ariel come over and I was like, okay, here's how this book's going. And then we got to the part about this just tremendous protest and the emotional power of what happened. And she's like, this is a picture book. Can a picture book handle this? And I'm like, oh, we cannot leave this out, because this is the piece that is always, always left out. She's like, you're right. Okay, we're going to have to put this to a slightly older age group. So anyway, then the blessing of this book was this wonderful way the three of us worked together, because usually with a picture book, the author gets the text done, finishes their work, and then the illustrator works with the editor. We couldn't do that in this book because there was photographs and I had already got those guys going. And then Lauren would be like, well, yeah, we could use that photograph, but I've done all this research and I found this other photograph. And I'd be like, oh, yes, let's swap out that photo. So we just had this amazing ability to collaborate. That's not usually given to the author, to be able to be involved at that point. And I'm so grateful for that, because it took us to a much deeper level than we could have got to individually. I do understand why that boundary's in place, because you don't want the writer telling the illustrator what to do, because the illustrator needs to own the book themselves. But there was magic with this project, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah, the collaboration. What didn't surprise me about this book, I'm just trying to think of any one thing, any one fact I learned, any one way I felt, and I can't. It was constant, and it wasn't always good surprises. Like I would be sometimes researching something, and I would just, burst into tears. I would just have to stop, and so that was a surprise to me, how much I felt, and then how something could work between an author and an illustrator, that surprised me. And the generosity, that surprised me. And just everything I learned, even from the little bureaucratic things that of course were present, like Toyo couldn't, when they actually allowed him to take photos, he couldn't press the button himself because they had to get somebody else to press the button for him. Just these little things. And it was just constant, just revelations.
So was it challenging? It sounds like, this book has got tons of research and primary source material and all that stuff. But there was censorship and restrictions to photography. Was that difficult, or did it seem like you were able to find everything you needed?
I definitely found everything. It was because even the impounded photos. So Dorothea Lange's, we talk about it in the book, but the photos or this one person, Beasley, thought were inappropriate, or for some reason or other were impounded. And so now that we have access to those photos, it was so much visual information to go through, and it was incredible. That was another thing that surprised me, actually, how much documentation there actually was.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the joys of putting this book together, was discovering how much there actually was if you dug and dug and dug, which both of us did. And then I think this example about Beasley is a really good one. He was the one who got to decide which of Dorothea's photographs would be impounded. And so I had the photos with impounded. We could find which ones were impounded because there was some careful secretary who wrote impounded on certain photos, and they were put way back in the files, but not destroyed. So we were able to eventually get a hold of them through the National Archives. But we didn't have that, nobody was a fly on the wall watching Major Beasley say, like, no, you can't have this photograph. Okay, Dorothea, this one we'll put in. And Dorothea Lange and Beasley did not like each other. And Lauren's able to do this great spread of Dorothea coming in with an attitude like, okay, here's my photos, and being impounded, trying to say why they are all good and need to be available, and Beasley being like, nope, gonna impound some of these. So that's a great example of what wasn't available in photography, but could be illustrated in to make that narrative line really go through with emotional impact.
Yeah, and the third part of this book is photography and Elizabeth's background with photography, and just even the mechanics of photography, the politics of photography, of image making, and hopefully that's another layer that kids and even the adults who read it can get from it.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions about truth that get to that as well. It's like, who gets to decide what is shown and how that's presented? The truth is always somewhere in there, but it's not always full. And I don't know if it can be, but because everybody's got their own perspective. It just, wow. That's what this book, it just shows you how hard that is. Even when someone's trying to do it right, there's always this angle or this twist that just, it's amazing.
Yeah, and perspective, I mean, that's the word, right?
Mm-hmm,
because you have the perspective of these three photographers, three different people, three different social standings, three different deficits or lack of deficits, and their lens on an event. And so it talks about privilege as well, and talks about the way that somebody sees something may not be the way that you see something, and another great lesson for kids to learn, or to be maybe start to think about, because it is a really big idea.
Yeah. So
Elizabeth, I think that's like a really core part of our book is for kids to be able to read this and be like, wow, these three photographers made very different images of the same experience. And just to let kids start thinking about that idea that, a photographer does have an agenda. They do have a viewpoint, and they're going to share that with you. And something I think people often don't understand is that there is, when the person being photographed knows the photographer, you will see that in the photograph. That's one of the wonderful things about Toyo's photographs is there's an openness in the faces of the people he photographed, because he was of this group of people. He was not outsider. And that's like a really important thing to think about as you look at any photograph. What is the relationship of the person being photographed to the photographer? It's there. It is in the photograph somewhere. So just one of the little things we wanted to implant in kids' minds to get them mulling over what they are seeing when they really look at stuff.
It's not even, and your book talks about not even just the photographs, but even the words that were used to describe the event itself.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Elizabeth, you took the time to really define the event and explain why these words that we use matter. Why was it important for you to put that in, to add that aspect of this story in there?
Yeah, it's really critical to also think about vocabulary, because it really can be used to hide what's happening. When when this is called an internment, it was not an internment. It was an incarceration. It was an imprisonment. When you are put behind barbed wire and not allowed to go out, you are in a prison camp. And to try to soften that as something else is not okay. So I just, also another thing, you want to think about the words that you use or read. Like, is this really true? Is this the right word for this?
Right. So, Elizabeth, you think you answered this already, but Lauren, maybe I'd like to know, looking at all these photographs, was there one that was super potent or moving for you when you were making this book? And why?
I feel like, yeah, I'll say like the same thing. They're all so incredible. I mean, I think the one that was the catalyst for Elizabeth, of the grandfather and the grandchild, and there's a few from different points of view. The one we ended up using was the close-up, and because it illustrates just on its own, the injustice. What did this old man have to do with anything that's going on? What did this baby have to do with anything that's going on? So that one is just so especially heartbreaking. And then basically anything with a kid or a baby, or anybody with tags on them that identified them as a number. It was extremely, extremely difficult. And I wanted to be really confrontational with that fact by having just on one of the spreads, just a really big portrait of a boy and somebody looking at his tag like he's merchandise, like he's not a human anymore. And I wanted it to be just right in your face like that. So even with the illustrations, even when there's not any photographs present, they were all informed by these photographs that had a huge impact on me.
Another thing we were able to do with this book was add in like photographs of what's called ephemera, actual things that, like, for example, like what Lauren's talking about with the boy and his tag being looked at like he's something they might pick up at the store. I have an older friend who was incarcerated during the war, and he still had his tag, Tom Sasaki. And I was like, Tom, could I put a photograph of that tag in my book? And he was really happy to share it because it carried a lot of emotion for him. So we were able to do that and show this crazy loyalty oath that people were expected to sign, saying, they pledged they were not going to show any allegiance to the Japanese emperor. And a lot of them were people who'd grown up in the United States. And they were like, how can I say I will no longer pledge loyalty to the Japanese emperor when I never, ever have? So it was a terrible form. But so we just had great little pieces of reality to put in there.
It's all amazing. And then the back matter of this book, it just keeps going with these amazing things. I mean, I know, Lauren, you wrote an essay on the damage of the model minority myth. How did that piece specifically come about, and why was it important to include in this book?
It was definitely wasn't part of the back matter to begin with, and as I kept on working on this book and kept on uncovering more and thinking more about my identity and the identity of I mean, Asian Americans is such a broad term, right? Because Asia is such a huge place with all of these different types of people, and just thinking about how it still impacts us today, what happened and this particular event, how it was documented, how it relates to how Asian Americans still live today. And I think I brought it up to Elizabeth, and I'm like, we should put this in the back matter. And she's like, you should write it. And I'm like, okay, because I've written in the past, and I love writing, but this was a tall order, because not only did it have to be factual, obviously, relevant. It had to speak in a voice that would speak to a younger reader, and it was really personal to me. So that was a huge deal. And thank you for for saying you should do this, Lauren, because I learned so much about myself as a writer in that moment. And I think, people say, oh, this book is so relevant today, but it's always been relevant ever since Asians came to North America. It's been relevant and how they had this need to, okay, well, I need to fit in, I need to assimilate, and it's not, and it's partly for survival, and we see, okay, well, you work to be close to whiteness, be into proximity to whiteness, and you think that will keep you safe, but it won't. And it's something we've seen very, very explicitly over the past few years with COVID, and with the way Asian Americans are being treated, the uptick in hate crimes. And that is something I do mention also in this essay. And even on a personal level, it's something that, we assimilate, like my dad doesn't speak Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. And the loss of culture, the loss of language is specifically because of white supremacy, because of this idea that we need to strive to be closer to this thing. And it was even in the way that I think to myself, oh, when I remember how I felt when I was a kid, oh, I have to be perfect. I have to be the model minority. I have to be beyond reproach because I have 2 strikes against me already. And I am, and of course the experience of Asian Americans versus Black Americans versus Indigenous people, it is also so varied, because I feel, just for an example of this, I got a flyer in the mail that said, and it was from the Republican Party, and they're saying Asian and white Americans are under attack right now. And so when it's convenient, they try and, the white supremacy tries to bring in Asian Americans, say, like, we're together on this. And one of the huge damages of the model minority myth is to pit people of color against each other. And that is something I also mention in this essay, because it's a tool of white supremacy. And so the only way, we have to, dismantle it within ourselves. We have to try and dismantle it on a systemic level. And obviously my little tiny essay, it can't, cover so much of that, but just to get a kid to think about it. For example, I wish I had thought about it when I was a kid. I wish that somebody had pointed out to me that feeling that you have, this internalized feeling, it's real, and it is not your fault.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. I guess my follow-up question to that for both of you probably would be, like, how do you hope this book, contributes to that discussion of to American history? And in particular, in this, like you were mentioning, in the context of, the current conversation about, race and civil liberties. Where does this book fit into that conversation?
There is something really important about writing nonfiction and illustrating nonfiction to make it impactful, which is you don't want to hit things so on the nose that you're telling kids how to feel. You want that explosion of, oh my goodness, you want that explosion to happen in the reader. And I feel like Lauren and I pulled that off, where we lay it all out, but we don't tell anybody how to feel. We just say, look, here is all this. Here is an experience a whole bunch of people had. Here is why it's still important, whether you're white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, there is an experience here for you to take in and let it explode in your heart. And then you can make decisions in your life carrying that emotional knowledge. That's what I want to do. And I do feel that Lauren and we did that somehow. That was this magic with this book, is it went to that level where it could explode in people's hearts, which is so amazing.
It is. It's, oh my gosh. I mean, you say it so well. I always say, Elizabeth says it so much better than I ever could. And this is an example of one of those times. The reason it worked was the generosity of everybody involved, because different perspectives lead to better outcomes. Like the collaborations lead to obviously a richer experience. And yeah, that's just something Elizabeth, I keep on wanting to call her Betsy because that's why I keep on being like Elizabeth. She's such a master at nonfiction, and it's something I actually mostly read nonfiction. Betsy, did I ever tell you this, that I kind of mostly read nonfiction anyway, and it's kind of how I engage with. Yeah, it's because there's just so much. Not that I love fiction too, but to make something like this for younger readers. And I even heard of, time and time again, adults be like, this is for adults too. This is for everybody. And nonfiction is so powerful because it's laying it out and it's letting you internalize that knowledge.
That's my next question. Why make this book? I mean, this story needs to be told for everybody, like you said, it needs to be told to adults. But why specifically do we tell the story and make the story for children?
I believe that kids read differently than adults. I mean, I love to read nonfiction, my primary reading, because I love hearing about things. But I think kids reading nonfiction, they are opening their eyes to the big world. They're going out of, this is my family, this is my neighborhood, this is my city, and they're looking at a much bigger picture, and they're deciding how they want to be in that big world. And that's where I want to be. I want to be right there saying, hey, here's something I want you to think about. I want you to feel, so that you as an adult have an opportunity to keep making this world a better place, because we got to all work together. It's not falling in our laps. We have to keep defending our basic democratic principles. So it's right where I want to be. I agree. Many adults have read this book and said to me, oh my God, why isn't this for adults? I'm like, well, you can read it too. There's a little prejudice in our publishing world that a kid's book is not for adults. We're breaking that down with young adult literature is also for adults now. And a book like this is also for adults. So great, read it if you want. I've had friends be like, oh my gosh, I just went to the bookstore and bought 3 copies. I'm like, really? I've never had that experience before writing a book. But it's those kids. That's who I want. That's whose heart I want to reach.
I mean, it's obviously so powerful to be able to speak directly to children, and that is obviously under attack because of how powerful it is to lead children to critical thinking. It's not leading children to an opinion, your opinion. It's leading them to critical thinking. And it still amazes me how it is still happening, not still happening. So long story short, when we were at ALA last year, I had a librarian say to me, this book will probably be banned in my state, but we get the books in the hands of children. We do it. And so there are also those people who are working to enrich children and to give them the information. But it's so important. And I can't, oh gosh, if you get me started on how something, just even a simple book, it doesn't have to be about politics or anything. A book about a Chinese girl who learns about Chinese New Year is banned because it's talking about, you know, race, quote unquote. But it's so important. It's so like just and they've made it, the people who want to stop the flow of knowledge have made it even more important, and I think make people fight even harder. So that's on them.
And what's great is that this book has been recognized as, you know, the best nonfiction book in of the year, and it's so you get your sticker on it, but that also means so much to like stopping, maybe not stopping what you're talking about there, but everybody's going to pick up this book. Everybody who's interested in books is going to look at this book, and that's gotta. I mean, I don't have an award question for you because I don't that interesting to me, but you know, that's got to mean something that this thing has been recognized by so many people.
Yes.
Yeah, it just puts it in more places. That's the best part.
That's exactly right. It's like, oh, great. Now somebody who might not have noticed this book, a librarian who's like, oh, what look what won the Sibert this year. Oh, I bet the kids in my library would like to read that. That's what's super cool about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just so overjoyed also with my friends who say like, my kid wants to read a book where there's people that look like him in it, and there's also that simple thing as well. So just more, and yeah, the awards and acclaim, of course, it's great, but it's about, yeah, more people seeing it, more kids having it in their hands, and that's the reason why I work so hard to make it so visually interesting, is also to lead people to the content. And that, I mean, as an illustrator, that's my biggest job, whether I'm doing editorial illustration, advertising illustration. But the older I get and the more I'm like, well, I don't have that much time on this earth. I want to bring people to things that are more important, and what I think are events, etc., social topics, things that need to be highlighted.
What's next for both of you?
I'm working on another picture book, which is very exciting. And this one is more of a, you know, capital P picture book with kind of big splashy illustrations on every page, not too long. And it'll be another kind of way to challenge myself. And then also just keeping on with my editorial illustration practice and writing more and all of that.
Elizabeth, what's next for you?
I am actually diving into one more project that revolves around the Japanese American incarceration, which is Ruth Asawa, an incredible sculptor who was a friend of my grandmother's. Did a beautiful memorial to the incarceration that's very personal to her and to everyone. And I'm trying to see if I can put it together. It's complicated. It is complicated, but I'm working on that. And I'm got a couple other projects that are definitely knocking on the back of my head saying, come on, let's go. So never at a loss for ideas. That's never been my problem. So just full of ideas and trying to form up where I go next.
So what is my final question about this book is what was the best thing about making, or now you guys have shared this book with the world, what is the best thing about sharing this story with the world?
Honestly, for me, because I am a very emotional person, I feel like I'm sorry, hang on, I gotta get myself together here. I fulfilled a promise to Terazo Sakaway that I would tell his story and more than 120,000 other people's stories. And that's a good feeling. That's a good feeling. And I have to say, I'm incredibly grateful that we had these photographs to kind of use as our guideposts in putting this book together. Then I put together the text and Lauren put in the illustrations. And, you know, if we had no photographs of this, we might not be believed. And so I'm so grateful that we had these 3 amazing photographers and we're able to work with their images.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, there are a few ways to help Picture Booking out and shape what this show is. You can subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever player you are listening to right now and send this episode to your book friends. Have you read a fantastic book lately or have a creator in mind that we need to have on? Subscribe to the Picture Booking newsletter at picturebooking.com/listen. And we'll let you know when we are ready to book future episodes. Take care and thanks again for listening.